The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on any information provided here is solely at your own risk.
Hi, everyone. On this week's episode, we are going to be talking about some heavy subjects, talking about pregnancy loss and stillbirth. So we just want to make sure that everyone hears and knows that if you are not in the space to listen to this episode right now, you absolutely can and should skip past this week's episode. And without further ado, here is Elaine's story. Welcome. This is Birth, baby. Your hosts are Sierra Morgan and Samantha Kelly. Sierra is a birth doula, hypnobirthing educator, and pediatric sleep consultant.
Samantha is a birth doula, childbirth educator, and lactation counselor. Join us as we guide you through your options for your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support. If you enjoy our content, please be sure to like, follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps us gain visibility to other people that could benefit from listening in. Hello, everyone. Today we have a special birth story episode for you. This is going to be a little bit different than some of our other stories, and we think that it has as much room here as any other birth story. And we hope that anyone going through the same when listening to this will be able to find value and potentially healing in hearing this story. So today we have with us Elaine Nguyen. She is a pediatric speech and language pathologist, and she's also a mom of two. She has one baby here on Earth and one angel baby who was born earlier this year, April of 2024. She's here to share her birth story with us, and the community that she has created since her son's loss is called ATX Loss Mama. She made this for other families that have gone through this experience or are going through this experience. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Elaine.
Thank you so much for having me.
As we were just saying before the recording, we're just so honored that you are willing to share the story with us and for our listeners. Can you? I think we want to give you the space to tell your story without any boundaries here. So with that, will you tell us about your pregnancy experience?
Yeah. So just thanking you both again, and we're recording this right now in October, which happens to be Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And that is why I think it's so important to almost share my birth story and bring that awareness. So I really appreciate you to giving the platform to do so. So this pregnancy was my second. My firstborn was a girl. I had a daughter, and my second one was my son, Lando. And from the pregnancy, it was a lot more challenging than the first one in the sense of symptoms. My firstborn, I think throughout pregnancy, the best way I would describe it is I felt like I had a mild hangover like every day. But with my son, I remember quickly on being so nauseous and exhausted. And I know people say it's because I had, an earth baby already and a toddler running around. I think that contributes some, but I actually feel like it's also the recovery of your body too. And also every pregnancy is different. I feel like going into the first one, I was fresh. And then the second one, almost, they are 2 years apart. And so my daughter was one, a little after one when we conceived, or not conceived, but got pregnant with him. And I just remember being really sick, really nauseous, and having pretty much all the classic pregnancy symptoms that you would hear of. But I think that looking back, if you look from the medical side, my doctors would always say it was the perfect pregnancy. And I put that in air quotes, because it's just, even if we fast forward to my labor and delivery and just figuring out his loss, it's just still, we don't know the reason why. And it's just like he was perfect. Everything was supposed to go the way you would expect any pregnancy to go.
Yeah, you hear people say, like, oh, I feel awful, but at least that's a good sign. Like, at least I know that my body is doing something. So it's like that reassuring thing, right? Even though you feel like crap, you're kind of happy to feel like crap because you know, oh, well, maybe that is a good sign. Things are going the way that they're supposed to. And we even have moms who, once that starts to dissipate, feel a little nervous. They're like, well, I'm not feeling sick and I feel like I should feel sick. So,
Yeah.
at what point in your pregnancy did you find out that your baby was no longer with us and did not have a heartbeat?
So he was a full term baby. So we were at the cusp of 35 going on 36 weeks. Um, and that's the hardest part is that I just remember being in that time and place, going to his appointment. It was Friday, April 20th. And I remember he had a heartbeat. It was just a routine checkup. And we had our appointment scheduled like every week after that, just because we know things were getting closer to delivery date. And we were anticipating potentially around 38 weeks, because that's when I had my daughter, that's potentially when I would have him. So truly, we were thinking 2 to 3 weeks he would be here. And it was that Saturday. So Friday, he had a heartbeat and everything was fine. And doctor cleared and said, he looks great. And Saturday, I remember vividly the symptoms of just like feeling extremely tired. I was supposed to go to a friend's birthday party. I still ended up going, but I remember taking a really big nap and just being very exhausted. But part of me was wondering, like, oh, is it because my body's preparing me? Because I remember being like this with my firstborn, where in third trimester and closer to her due date, I was getting more tired and just wanting to rest more. So I thought that's what was happening to my body. Where it really alarmed me was I was tired Saturday, Sunday, but Monday, I remember waking up for work and just being very, very, very groggy and just feeling like a mild headache, and just really exhausted. But I still honestly didn't even think about like too much of it. And to be quite frank, it was exhaustion to the point that I slept maybe 14, 16 hours. Like I had to go back to sleep. And I really just didn't think anything of it other than I'm just really tired. And that's really all I could think about at that point. And so that happened through Monday. And then Tuesday, it happened again. And it wasn't until evening time that I thought about it. And I was like, like that's the only symptom I've really had was complete, utter like fatigue and maybe a little bit of a headache. But that was when I first thought, like, as I was going to bed Tuesday night, like, when was the last time Lando kicked? Like, I don't know if I felt him kick, but again, I was so tired to the point where I was falling asleep at my laptop, like working, and I was just like dozing off. And my husband was like, maybe you've just been sleeping a lot and he's sleeping, like, you don't know he's sleeping with you, or you're not aware because you're tired. And he was like, it's pretty late. Let's just go to sleep and then we'll check in the morning. And so morning came of Wednesday. And that morning I remember getting up and I did everything that you would do to elicit movement from your baby. I drank juice. I went for a walk. I exercised. I moved I pushed against him and like my womb and just like tried to elicit some movement. And I didn't feel anything. And that's when I called the hospital and I asked if I could be admitted into labor and delivery. And they said, yeah, like, let's go ahead and get you checked in so that we can check you out and make sure everything's okay with baby. And I really thought, worst case scenario, we're going to have somewhat premature, but not really, because this baby's pretty full term, but earlier side, delivery. And that would be it. So, I packed my backpack with my work laptop, drove myself to the hospital. My husband was home with my daughter just working. It was just a normal Wednesday. And I remember being called back into the room and the nurse, smiling and just saying like, okay, I'm just going to check for your baby's heartbeat and then we'll go from there. And as she was checking, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. It was like a very faint sound and then a lot of whooshing, like kind of just like the internal sounds. And you can just see the face change in the nurse. And the hard part is that no one really wants to say it to you until it's fully confirmed. But I think intuition, a lot of people can kind of read the room, but also I think being in the medical field, I kind of know what they're doing and I'm anticipating. And I just said, you don't see his heartbeat. You don't hear his heartbeat, do you? And then she said, she actually didn't say yes or no. She just put her hand on my shoulder and she started crying. And she's like, we're going to bring in some other doctors. And she's like, we're just going to check. And she said, just stay here. And next thing you know, it's kind of one of those classic scenes from a movie where 4 to 6 medical providers, like I don't even know their titles, different levels of doctors and nurses and machines and IVs. And next thing you know, I was like hooked up to a bunch of different things and monitors and straps. And you know it's a problem when everyone comes in and they strap you up and they check things and they go outside of the room to discuss. And when they re-enter, everyone is crying. And it's like, okay, all right. I just remember being in so much shock and everyone kept saying, can you please, do you have a partner? Can your partner come in right now? And then I said, is it confirmed? And they still wouldn't answer. And they said, we need your partner to come in right now. It's best if you get your partner in right now. And calling my husband, Vince, he was in such disbelief and he was so angry. And he was just like, well, like he was so shocked. So I was like, honey, I don't think our baby's here anymore. You need to come in. You need to bring our daughter. You need to wake her up from nap and just bring her in right now. And he's like, but what are they saying? Did they say that, Lando's gone? And I said, they're not saying it to me, but basically, and he's like, no, like I need to hear it. But they weren't going to say it. And they just said, please bring your husband in. He needs to come in right now because we need to move on to the next stage soon. And we don't want you to do it alone. So, and so that is April 24th. So that's 4 days. 20th, I heard his heartbeat. And then within those 4 days, so much has changed. And that was when, I realized we no longer had a heartbeat. He had passed. And my husband, by the time he arrived, that was when my OB, who's been part of my journey since my firstborn and now second, she was the one there. And then she was the one who gave us the news officially, but she didn't even have to say it. She just started sobbing and we all sobbed with her. And she just hugged us. And then she said she'll give us some time. And then when we're ready, we're going to talk about the next steps of what's to come.
I think that this is such an important thing for people to hear, that because I love that you're sharing like what their reactions were and that they cried with you. I'm holding back tears, crying with you, and that's okay. That we don't have to pretend like everything's fine. This is very hard. So I'm really glad that you shared like how the people around you reacted.
Yeah, no, it definitely, looking back, it's the most compassionate care you can receive in a circumstance like this. When people say there are no words, there's not enough sorries, or almost like the most tragic, unbelievable thing happened, like that's what happened. And in those moments, you do pray that there are people who will approach with compassion and go beyond just their day-to-day work, because I recognize that's their day-to-day job and that's their title. But the way they all really compassionately held me, and they asked me if I needed anything. They asked me if I wanted, to like have someone to hold hands with or hug or pray over me. And I said yes to all those things. And, almost everyone there at one point probably hugged me or like put their hand on my shoulder and just prayed over me. And I think my OB just has a really special place in my heart because of just how much she's been on this journey with us and how much she was heartbroken. And it was visible when she came in, and the first thing she said to me was, "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I'm so sorry. This was never expected. We never, like this, we wouldn't have seen this coming." And I cried, and she even said the things I was thinking. She's like, "We just heard his heartbeat on Friday." And I was like, "I know." And to hear her almost processing it the way that I'm processing it, and that shock, it did bring comfort in that time, and just feeling like, okay, I'm understood too. Like, she understands how my heart is breaking right now. And yeah.
It's a lot of validation, I think, in a situation like that. Like, yeah, this is so not the norm. This is not what anyone would expect from something, where we just heard him, we saw him, we felt him.
Yeah.
So what was kind of outlined as the next steps? What options were you given from there?
So after that, and my husband was with me, that's when she gave us some options. And then after giving the options neutrally, that's where she gave her input of, "But this is what I recommend." She said, "Your first option is you can go home and you can wait until your body starts to go in contractions and your body naturally goes into labor. If you need to go home." And the benefit to that is you get time to process. And if you're not ready to take all this on right now, that makes a lot of sense. And secondly, the benefit to that is once we start this process of you going into labor and delivery, you do have to decide what the hospital is going to do with your son's body. So that means before you leave this hospital, you have to decide which funeral home is he going to? Is he cremated or is he buried? What that process looks like, and what kind of arrangements are you going to make? And so that's the benefit of going home if you need some time to wrap your head around that. The second option was to go into labor and delivery, which would mean inducing. And then she said, you can do natural delivery, where we would induce you to get contractions, and then you would go through the whole process of natural vaginal birth, or we can go the route of a C-section, which would be a lot faster. And this would just happen probably within minutes, like less than an hour, you would be done. And she said, "I understand right now you may want this baby just out of you too." And to be honest, that's what I was thinking in my head originally. I was like, I just want this baby out of me. Knowing that he passed and everything, like there's just a level of like, just knowing what's about to come, you almost kind of want to just like, at least for me, I just want to expedite the process.
Yeah.
But then as she explained everything, and she said, I wouldn't recommend that though, because your first one, you had a vaginal delivery, and just for healing purposes, I don't want you to have to learn a different way of healing physically in this one. And you don't have to think about it right now, but should you decide to have more children, you would be already kind of classified where you may need to get C-section again, depend on your healing and all of that. And so she's like, "I really don't recommend that, but I respect whatever you decide." And that's when, my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, all right, let's do vaginal delivery and get induced. And she said, "This is probably going to be the best for you physically, but it's probably going to be the hardest emotionally." And so that's when I got rolled into labor and delivery, and they started administering, I don't remember the different medications, but essentially they give you a pill that starts to induce you and get your body to start contracting, so that you can start the delivery process. And it took me, she gave me heads up. She's like, it's probably going to be all night. You're probably not going to start going into delivery until the next morning. And so just plan on being here overnight, and that your body's going to have to process, like go through this process of getting to where we need it to be to deliver the baby.
You had such an amazing doctor. I mean, the things that you're saying and the choices your doctor gave you and the explanations of the benefits, like this as a doula is like checking all of the boxes. I mean, it was handled so beautifully. And I'm so thankful that that was your experience and that you got to know all of the information before making a decision and knowing that what I'm about to do is going to be harder emotionally for me and being able to prepare for that. Like, not that you had much time to prepare, but so when you started going through this process, did it kind of play out the way that she anticipated?
Yeah, it did. And there was a moment I asked her because, I still had my daughter and we didn't really have arrangements. We didn't expect this. And so at one point I had asked her, I'm like, if it's going to take all night, maybe I should just stay here and he should go home and be with my daughter. And she said, I really don't want you to be alone. If you can find someone, please find someone to stay with your daughter overnight. And we had a nanny at that time, and our nanny is so great. And I called our nanny, and without any hesitation, she just, dropped everything, packed her bags, and was like, I'll spend the night to be with Livy so that you can do what you need to do. So Vince came and he stayed the night, and that night was brutal in the sense that it is such a slow process, and it gave us a moment to really understand what was happening. But at the same time, it was exhausting. Just imagine being in the hospital setting where you hear all the beeps, they're checking you every hour, 2 hours, and you're getting medication. And, I am picking up in contractions, but not to full, it's taking the whole night. But, I do feel discomfort. And so my sleep isn't the best, but I mean, even then, it's just, there was so much turmoil. And I will just go ahead. It's short, but during that time I just jotted notes down in my phone of just what I was thinking about, because I just kind of knew what was ahead. And so this is what I wrote at that time. It was at 11 p.m. And I wrote, I'm just honestly scared of a lot right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to have the strength to do any of it. Strength to go into labor and knowing what's on the other side. Strength to hold Lando, to say hi and bye. Strength to plan a funeral. Strength to go home and see his room. All my postpartum stuff. Strength to pump milk even though I don't have a baby to feed. Strength to still go through all the postpartum healing, but no reason for this healing. Strength to even help me process what the next weeks, months will look like without him. How can I be there for Vince? He's hurting too, and we're both just so lost. Strength in all the loss of milestones, adventures, and fun we envisioned with him. Strength to overcome the fact that I'll probably spend the rest of my life wondering about him and who he could have been. All the while still recognizing the joy that Livy brings, but also strength in grieving how amazing of a sister she would have been. So that was what I wrote, because I just had a lot of time and I was so aware of the big mountain. I knew that this was the biggest mountain that I will ever have to climb in my life. And I knew I was at the very bottom, and it's not even the bottom with a clear hiking path or anything. I knew it had no landmarks, no clear destination, no pathway. I knew I was just going to have to figure it out. Yeah. And during this time was where my husband and I spent that night calling our families, texting our families, our friends, letting everyone know that we no longer have Lando with us, that he lost his heartbeat. And so that's kind of what we spent that night doing and praying. And his side of it, which, I don't, or all of us in any journey, the mom has their own kind of experience and then the dad has their own experience. And he told me this after everything had happened, but he said that night his focus was really like, he was heartbroken about Lando, of course, but his first and foremost fear was about me going into labor. He was just so worried about my safety that he said he couldn't sleep that night because all he could think was like, he needed me to be okay and to pray for me. So yeah, so that was what that night kind of looks like. And then it was just as my OB predicted. It was that morning, 8 a.m. She came in, and you can tell, and I appreciate this about her. She came in, and you can tell she had her OB like hat on, and she said, okay, if you're okay with it, let's get this going. You're dilated enough. I'm going to manually break your water now, and then we're going to get going. And so she broke my water, and basically, like, I think it took like 20 minutes, and then he was out. So it was really fast delivery. And to be honest, my delivery with my daughter was pretty fast too. Like the moment I was dilated to the level that I need to be, I think it was 30, 40 minutes that she came out. And so with Lando, after 20 minutes, he came out, and at 8:55 a.m. he was born. And that was where I think the weight of it really crushed my husband, because I think it's different being the one who carries and feels the baby and knows there's a baby there versus your partner who kind of watches the physical changes. But I didn't look, but I knew the moment my son, not only because I could feel the doctor pulling Lando out, but I knew my son was out because of the way that my husband cried, and then he collapsed. And I just knew that was his realization of our son is actually gone. And after that, they give options. The postpartum nurse that I had was amazing, and my doctor was amazing. And they just said, you have some options here. And they said, you can hold your son. You can do skin to skin. You can have him wrapped, or we can just put him in the bassinet until you're ready, if you like. But then my doctor did say, I'm just going to tell you, he has a little bit of what they call slipping skin. And it's just what happens when babies have already passed. And so he is going to look a little bit different. And I just want you to be aware of that. And so then after that, and I could kind of see from a distance. And so I asked if they could swaddle him so that I could hold him. And and then I held him, and it was, he was so beautiful, and it was so wild and heartbreaking, because it really hit me like, oh, he's the exact same size that what his sister was when she was born. And his weight, he was always bigger than her. He was almost like double her size. So he was way bigger than her, and just the weight to him, holding him. And I just thought, wow, like both were miracles, but like, how does one get to still have a heartbeat and then another doesn't? But like, to hold him and feel like you feel like your sister, you look like your sister, you weigh like your sister, you're even heavier than your sister. And it blew my mind to just think, what a miracle it is to have a baby, because it's like 1,000 things can go right and 1,000 things can go wrong. And there's sometimes no rhyme or reason for either one. And both are beautiful, and both can be heartbreaking in different ways. And so, I held him, and if I can say anything, is I'm grateful, and I almost wish I had more, but I'm grateful that I had the few photos and videos that I took of him, and that my husband took. He did not want to, and he will say to you, if you ask him now, that he was really upset with me for asking him to record, because he just felt like he did not want to do that. But now looking back, he realized like this is part of our family's history, and Lando's a part of our family's fabric. And without this documentation, we really have no other ways to connect to that moment. So I have a few videos of us praying over Lando and talking to him and singing to him. And those are videos that I cherish. Yeah.
I think that's so common for people to feel like they wouldn't want, video or photo evidence of something like that. But almost every time, people decide or realize later that those things are so extremely special. I've seen that happen, and it's, it is powerful. It's impossible to walk through, but having those like visual memories of, this person that's part of you that you grew is huge.
Yeah. It's hard to explain unless you've been in that position, the push and pull. I think from an outsider, everyone would think, well, why wouldn't you want to hold your baby, or why wouldn't you want to photograph? But there's so much trauma like just wrapped around it. And honestly, it's really hard to see your baby a little bit deformed, and like to not, it hurts to see your baby that way, and to see their skin kind of change colors over time, and the slipping skin and like the tenderness, it is hard. And so I don't blame any moms who don't do it. But I will say, as I'm getting further and further away from his due date, or birth date, I should say, I'm 5 months out now. It almost starts, I have moments where I'm like, was he real? Wait, did this happen to me? And I have to go look at those photos and those videos, and I remind myself, okay, he was here. It was real. It did happen. And I'm grateful for that. And it's, what I have to hold on to. And I think a lot of moms do feel that way down the road. And so something that, even if you didn't do it yourself, hopefully your nurse will do it for you, because what happens is, at least at St. David's, they gave me a memory box, a keepsake box, and it's white box with just little things in there, connected to Lando, like little books or blankets and swaddles. And one of the things my nurse had said was, or asked was, do you want him photographed? And I remember being a little bit hesitant, because more time had passed at this point. I think it was almost close to noon. And so it's almost been 3 hours. And so his skin did start changing even more so. And I remember being uncomfortable with that, and being like, this is really hard to look back at and look and like process. But I just remember telling her, can you please just take it, and then I'll decide if I want to look at it later. And then she said, absolutely, we do that. And she said, I'm going to take some photos. I'll put it in an envelope and I'll seal it. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, if you ever want it, it's there and you can open it up. And I think the only regret I have in that moment, knowing now, is I do wish that I had asked her to photograph sooner. And I have opened it since, and I've looked at it. And I do remember thinking, oh, I wish I would have been brave enough to do it a lot sooner, to capture more of what I remember, what he looked like when he first came out of me.
That's one of those things that's really hard, is like, as you get, I'm a mess. I'm sorry. But like with anyone that you lose that you love, over time, your memory fades. And so having that, like, I recently lost my grandfather, which is completely different, but like you want to remember what they looked like, not just what your memory has. And I'm so glad you have that.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for it too. They took pictures of his little hands and his toes, and he had the biggest hands and the biggest feet. And it made me laugh, because I thought, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Because during my pregnancy, I would just remember my daughter sitting on my bump, thinking it was just an extra chair or cushion for her. And I always knew that he had a personality of his own already, because anytime she would sit, I would feel him push back really hard to the point where she would turn around, Livy would turn around, look at me, and she'll say, "Mama, stop." And I would say to her, I'm like, "That wasn't me, that was your brother." And so
Fighting already.
Yeah.
to see his hands and his feet, I said, "Oh, that's what it was. Like, you had really strong, strong kicks and strong hands." Like, yeah, I felt it all
Can I ask
pregnancy.
how much he weighed?
Yeah, he weighed 6 pounds at 35 weeks, 36. And so he was projected to be close to 8 pounds in the next couple of weeks. My
Yeah.
daughter was born at 6 pounds and 9 ounce. And so for him to already, it was
He was
almost
beating her.
every appointment we had. I remember my daughter was always considered on the petite side, and they would say, okay, she's like in the 35th or 40th percentile, whereas he was in like the 50th to 65th percentile, so almost like double her percentile. So yeah, that was also what contributed to a little bit more challenges in this pregnancy, was that heavier baby.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what happened after that? Where did y'all go from there?
So we made our decisions, and I'm really grateful that my husband did take more of the lead in this aspect of, I just wanted to be discharged. And I don't know if this is common in any second delivering labor, or if it's very specific to my situation. But they allowed me to be discharged the exact same day. I just had to pass a few tests. They want to make sure that I can go to the bathroom safely, that my bleeding was minimal, or at least like appropriate amount. And so the moment she said that, I was like, all right, we're going to pass all these tests, because all I want to do now is go home and be with my daughter. And so I would say I delivered him at 8:55, and then it was probably 1 or 2 p.m. that then I got, what is it called? Not
Discharged or moved to
discharged. I was
postpartum.
going to say dismissed, and I was like, we're not in school, but
Yeah.
yeah, discharged.
Discharged.
And before doing that, though, then they bring in social service person who says, like, okay, now what do we do next? What have you guys planned to do with Lando? And so they did give us a sheet of paper to kind of look at. It's just like bulleted like 1 through 10, just a bunch of funeral homes. And my husband, luckily did some research the night before. We kind of talked about that, and he chose the funeral home. And then that's where they will send the baby. And I'm grateful that he picked one that was close to our home, that is beautiful, and that we like, because had it just been me, I would have thought, let's just send the baby whatever funeral home, and we can always transfer to another one if we need to. Just for anyone listening, if you've been through it, then you've been through it. If you haven't, it actually costs a lot of money to then release your baby's body from the funeral home to go to another one. It's not as simple. And so I'm really glad that the one we chose was the one we wanted to stay at. And then it was the question of, how are we going to prepare his body? Is he going to be buried or cremated? And for us, we don't know if Texas is always going to be our home. We don't know if Austin's always going to be our home. And honestly, I was 50-50. I didn't really know what to do, but my husband said, let's cremate him, because I can't leave him behind a second time again. Like, wherever we go, we need to be able to bring him. And so we cremated Lando. And then that's where my husband, then he had to do some paperwork and all the discharge things. And then I was left in the room. And that was probably the part that, as much as I was looking forward getting out of there and being back with my daughter, that's when the reality hit of, oh no, like, I'm leaving him behind. Like, how do I do that? And I just remember, the nurse being like, "Are you ready?" And I just kept saying yes. And then I was like, no. And then yes, and then no. And just thinking, I really want to go home right now. Like, I want to be in my safe place, but I also want to be with my baby, like all my babies. And then I think that was another reality that hit, that I'm never going to be with all of my babies at the same time. It's always going to be in different lifetimes. Um, and I just thought, how sad and devastating that it didn't work out, that we could all be together physically in one timeline, that we're always going to have to miss each other in some shape or form. But yeah, I kissed him. I said a prayer, and I told him I know he's going to be everywhere with me, and I'll be looking for him. And I left him. And as I was getting pushed out of the hospital with this white box, it was just so jarring of just remembering with my daughter what that was like. And even my nurse was great, because I think they already put me specifically in a different side of the hospital, so I wouldn't have to hear all of the joy and crying of like the babies that are being born. So I was already isolated in a different spot, I could tell. But even when she was pushing me out, I felt like she was pushing me in a very strategic way, because I could see some other new moms getting pushed out with their baby, and she made sure to almost take a different path and take a different elevator, so that like I wouldn't have to be right next to another mom holding their baby as they were leaving. So I appreciated that she did that. Yeah, then that's when I went home, and then that was where we started the journey of postpartum, going through his funeral, and then accepting the day-to-day of what that new norm would look like, and what it meant to be a mom to an angel baby, because I'm still his mom, and I still have ways that I take care of him and nurture him, but it's just not anything I've ever imagined doing in my lifetime. Not the way I thought being a boy mom or motherhood would look like for me.
Absolutely. So, what did that postpartum look like for you?
It's something that I was surprised about, but also it makes sense. Is it looks like any other postpartum. And I think a lot of people get surprised by that. My body did deliver a baby. It had a baby. It went through all the hormone changes. And so what that meant was, especially being second time around, my milk supply came in way faster, way stronger. I had a little bit of supply issue my first time around, and this time none at all. But it was initially very heartbreaking to have all of this milk and not have him to feed. But then it started to become a little bit heartbreaking when my supply eventually stopped over time. And I mean, that was the goal. I was trying to decrease my milk supply, but when it started decreasing, I remember feeling this bittersweet feeling of, it was my body's way of nurturing him and staying connected to him. It was like intuitively knowing that it needed to feed him. And now that it's stopping, it just feels like almost another lost milestone that we crossed off. And it just felt really painful of the different ways that my body will start to move further and further from him. And I'm grateful I have really great friends and community and connections. And I had a nurse practitioner who's also a lactation consultant who supported me during this process to make sure that I was weaning off in a healthy way, because she said, I think the hospital gives you some forms of like how you can do it too. And a lot of times it's like bandage it, just let it kind of compress and then wean off. But she said to me that she really wanted to make sure that I wouldn't drop so have such a big drop with my hormone changes. She's like, the milk supply that affects your hormones and everything. And I want to make sure we're weaning you in a healthy way that doesn't affect your mental health even more. And so we did it in a very gradual state. And, she prescribed me kind of how many times I would need a pump or, and what that would look like.
That's
And then
huge.
a lot of
That,
people don't think to do that.
yeah, like her pre-thinking about your hormones, not just like getting rid of it so you're not having to deal with it and you get to move on to another stage. It's even if you want it gone fast, there can actually be, a downside to that. I'm so glad
Yeah.
you had that support and that guidance.
Yeah, because I've had others who have been like, why can't you just stop it completely or just bandage it? And then just like, it would be, and take ibuprofen and it would go away completely and really fast. But I really knew, I trusted the nurse practitioner and lactation consultant that I was working with, because I knew she knew something about how it would affect my mental health. And I really do believe there is that connection in our hormones trying to balance itself, especially postpartum. I remember from my firstborn. And so I just knew like I'm in a really delicate stage. I don't need a crash. I don't need anything that would spike a crash or elicit any more harm to my mental health than it already is in. And she had told me, you can decide what to do with your milk. You can turn it into some jewelry as a keepsake. You can donate some if that makes you feel good, or you can freeze it and it's good for up to 3 years should you decide to have a rainbow baby. And so I did a little bit of everything. I donated a little bit. I saved a little bit, and I did turn it into jewelry, which I'm still waiting to receive. But I use some of the breast milk to turn into a ring that I will just have as kind of like a memory and connection to Lando.
I love that that you were even presented with all of those options, because so many people don't have that, and the breast milk jewelry and all of those things. And I love that you're like, I did a little bit of everything because that's what felt right to you. And if you hadn't been given all those options, you wouldn't have known that. I have a feeling that you getting all of the support is part of what led you to doing what you're doing today. Can
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit about your process of why you created this group that you created?
Yeah, so almost early on, after the delivery, I knew that at some point I would want a community, or I would want to create something like ATX Loss Mama. But at that time, I didn't have a name. I didn't really have an idea of what it would look like. I just knew I would need a group. Um, and it wasn't until July, so maybe that's about 2 months, almost 2 months, 3 month postpartum for me. July was Bereaved Parents Awareness Month, but I just remember specifically one night, and I like just couldn't sleep. And that is part of grief. You're going to have a hard time falling asleep, and it's just a challenge. But I just remember I had gotten to a point where I was starting to sleep again. And this one night I couldn't sleep, and I kept feeling a nudge of, you need to create this, you need to create this. And I went to my laptop and I created the name ATX Loss Mama, the logo, the fonts, the offerings. I did that probably within an hour and a half. And then I was able to go sleep. And then I put it out the next day, and the community that came and the response that came from the birth community, and the amount of DMs I received from moms who said, I've been looking for something like this. I needed this. I just know that that wasn't from me. It almost felt like Lando was like, Mom, we need to do this. Like, you got to do it. Because if anyone knows me, I'm so much of almost a perfectionist. I take my time on things, and I really, really have to sit and think about the colors, the wording, the font. But the fact that everything was completed in about an hour and a half, like late night, and then it wasn't even like I'm going to relook like and like try to edit this or revise it. The fact that I just put it out and the way that it went on, I just know so much that it was him, and that he's the one who's guiding it, and he's kind of behind it, saying like, this has to happen, Mom. Like, we need to bring this to life. So yeah, I give a lot of credit. I always say it's very spirit led. When people ask me, how did you make it happen? I said, it's very spirit led, because I had the idea, but that nudge of when I made it and how I made it and how it's being received. It feels very spirit-led. And so ATX Loss Mama is really a community that I envision bringing moms, and eventually I do want to help families as a whole. But right now, where I am in my grief, I just feel like I can only responsibly speak to moms because that's my experience, and I can't really go beyond that at this point. So we do monthly walks, support groups. We do some special events like this month at the end of the month. I am partnering with Bumpsuit and an author named Libby Weintraub, and we are going to do a day retreat for other lost moms to focus on a little bit of healing, but really acknowledgement with one another. And that is where it's at right now. And I am in the works of eventually turning it into a nonprofit, because I think in this short time already, the response I've gotten from the community, from the hospital, even like St. David's and even my church, sadly, so many people have been sent my way since my loss. So I know, one, it's prevalent, but two, the expression of just needing that community, because very early on, I also was aware that grief is a forever thing. It's not something that you're going to get over one day. You just kind of learn how to move with it in a different way. And I think communal grief is something that's really valuable, is being able to share a community around this and to be seen and held. And so that's really what ATX Loss Mama is about.
I love that. Is there anything that you would just like to leave, a little nugget that you're like, I just really want to say this to anyone out there that has maybe just experienced this, or, maybe they're further on down the line? And also, if you want to plug in where they can find you, and we're also going to put that in the show notes.
Sure. That's a big question. I think to anyone who is experiencing this or has experienced it, I first just want to really say I am so deeply sorry. Nothing can ever make that heartbreak feel better, and I completely understand that. And I think the thing that I will say, and that I've learned so far in my short journey, 5 months, right, is that you're allowed to grieve however you want. If it's privately, if it's loudly, if it's through tears, if it's through anger, because so many people say grief is just love. If grief is just love, we don't tell people how to love people. So why do we censor and tell people how to grieve people? So if you feel like you need to share your grief, your love, do that. If you feel like it's something you need to hold on to for just yourself, do that. If you need to write or create or cry or throw things, like, it's your expression of love, and you get to decide how to do that. And I think that prior to this experience, I was one of those who thought there's a right way to heal or a right way to approach this. And now I've realized, no, there's not. It's just a right way for whatever makes sense for you and in the season that you're in as well. So just let yourself love and grieve however you need to, and really lean into that.
Thank you so much. And you can find Elaine on Instagram and I think on Facebook as well. And then we'll connect all of those to the show notes too.
Yeah, it's on Instagram at Embracing Wholeness, spelled exactly how the words would be spelled. Yeah, we love to connect with other community members there.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Elaine, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us and Lando's story. You are honoring him in the most beautiful way, and we are so grateful to have you a part of the Austin community.
Thank you. I appreciate you both so much.
Thank you for joining us on Birth, Baby. Thanks again to Longing for Orpheus for our music. You can look him up on Spotify. Remember to leave a review, share, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.